person A. In doing so, person B is working towards isolating person A from other people and other supports in their life. Oftentimes, isolation is found in intimate partner violence, because in a relationship which is based on power and control, which is at the root of intimate partner violence, it's easier to control somebody who doesn't have many other people or other supports in their life. As you can see from this visual aid, name calling, belittling, it's often present in intimate partner violence relationships. Person B will take the secrets, the insecurities, and the stories that person A shared with them, and instead of being their safe person, they start to use them as ammunition in order to shoot down the self-confidence of person A. What was shared in trust with person B in the beginning is now used to intentionally hurt person A. This causes confusion, dissonance, wondering why someone who's supposed to love and care about you would say things to intentionally hurt you. This kind of emotional attack erodes confidence. It can result in person A starting to ask themselves if they're lovable, if to believe that they must be doing something wrong if now person B is talking to them in this way when they used to say how much they love them, how much they cared for them, and it begins to create a bunch of doubt as well as a number of other things within person A. Intimate partner violence relationships often follow a cycle of abuse. As you can see, there's 3 main phases. So it begins where, let's say that the couple is doing fine. And then person A starts to feel a tension building between themselves and their partner, person B. They might try to avoid the conflict. They might try to have dinner ready at a certain time or do extra things around the house or say nice things in order to try to make sure that they maintain this happy medium. However, since person B, the abuser, is consistently inconsistent in their behavior, in their emotional patterns, there's little that person A can do to avoid the eventual explosion phase. So this explosion phase can show up as threats of violence. It can show up as verbal abuse. It can show up as intimidation, destruction of property, physical, emotional violence. So after the explosion phase, person B will then move into apologizing, saying things like, I love you, I'm sorry, this will never happen again, I didn't mean it, you have to forgive me, I want to make this work, and so on and so forth. And as the relationship goes on, the cycle happens over and over again, often getting shorter and shorter in between all of these phases. This kind of up and down roller coaster can create what's called a trauma bond. It's a cycle between the fight or flight and the flooding of serotonin and dopamine when things are good. This plays a role in person A feeling physically addicted or mentally consumed with person B. It's important for us to remember that most abusive relationships don't start off that way. It is a connection in the beginning that is experienced and perceived as genuine bonding that often links the partners. And the cycles between the good and the bad times gives false hope that this relationship will improve or that the good times will return that were there in the beginning. So like I said, as the relationship continues, the cycles get shorter and shorter, and the severity often gets more intense. So today we're talking about the ethics. And I just want to draw attention to, why are we talking about intimate partner violence in medicine? We as professionals, it's demanded of us to develop skills and knowledge in order to care appropriately for our patients. 1 million women seek medical treatment for injuries obtained by violence committed by their intimate partners. 1/3 of them see healthcare professionals often repeatedly, and only 7% of assaults between partners are ever reported to the police. Oops, here we go. Sorry. So it matters that we're talking about this because We cannot rely on police and community organizations to address this issue. If only 7% of assaults between partners and spouses are ever reported to police, then how and where will these people get help? Those statistics blew me away because I know that intimate partner violence calls are one of the top 3 to 5 calls that are received by 911 dispatch centers each year. It deserves our attention and it deserves our consideration because our local shelters are at capacity almost every day and are forced to put people seeking safety and resources on wait lists. It matters because often medical professionals might be the only people told about intimate partner violence and able to help. So I'd like everybody to either take out a piece of paper or their phone and take a minute to look at these questions, and I'd like you to try to answer them and see if you have any idea about, how many Coloradans experience intimate partner violence, or how many folks that were killed with a partner were killed with a firearm. So we'll just take a little bit to do so. So for question number 1, the answer is going to be 36.8% of women will experience intimate partner physical violence in their lifetime, and 30.5% of men. The answer to question number 2 is 32. 32 Coloradans were killed in 2018. The answer to question number 3 is nearly 2/3 of those who were killed using firearms. The answer for number 4 is 15%. The answers for question 5 and 6 is that 1,221 were served and 269 were turned away or had unmet needs due to the lack of resources. And number 7 is a staggering 233,000. So as we move into our objectives, I'm sure that this isn't the first time that we've all seen medical ethics and thought about them and how they're applied to our practices and to the patients that we see. Communication ethics is incredibly important in the way that we speak to our patients and understand not only what we're trying to convey or how we're trying to convey it, but how our patients might hear those messages. As providers, we need to be cognizant of the messages that we're sending, how they might be received, and what that might mean as far as the patient's ability to understand or to make decisions. In terms of informed consent, it's imperative that we understand intimate partner violence in order to give patients the appropriate information that they need, not only to make decisions about their care, but about their lives and their next steps. It can be really tempting when caring for patients who are experiencing intimate partner violence to take on a paternalistic communication style. It can be a common experience. And I've seen it, I've heard it, I myself have had the urge or found myself wanting to influence or tell a patient what decision that they should make. Not out of any kind of malice or anything like that, but more of genuine concern for their safety and their well-being. So I hold that feeling with the knowing that if I speak to them that way, as if they don't know the situation they're in, as if they don't know the experience that they're having or also have worries or concerns, then I run the risk of devaluing their abilities, of potentially making them feel less than and left out of the conversation. That experience can be a triggering kind of treatment for them to experience with the provider. It can impact your rapport with them. It could impact their likelihood to come back for care, to reach out for help again, not just to medical professionals, but to anyone. and it risks them feeling shame and low self-esteem, and on and on. So when you are looking into the faces of your patients, try to keep this in mind. What they need is validation and support, and for us to hear them. A quick anecdote about that that I'd like to share as far as consent. So I have hundreds of stories that I could share, and I wish that I didn't, but I do. And anyway, so this particular case, it involves a young woman in her late 20s who was out celebrating her birthday, pre-COVID, of course. And I was working the weekend night shift in the emergency room when she came in. And to get to the heart of the case, while I was in there chatting with her about what had happened that night, she shared that she had been out on the dance floor for her birthday party when her ex-boyfriend, whom she had ended things with months before, due to abuse and violence in their relationship, had stalked her on Facebook, found her at that bar, and he walked onto the dance floor and he assaulted her. She had significant facial trauma, particularly over the bridge of her nose, and she was embarrassed and sad and angry, and telling me that she didn't want to stay. She just wanted to go home and go to bed, that she just wanted the night to be over. And as I'm sitting there and I'm listening to her and supporting her, I'm actively thinking to myself about how I can validate her, how I can support her decision making, but also give her information. At that point, we hadn't shown her face yet. We were waiting for plastics to come down and chat with her, and hoping that as they go through the consult, they would be able to show her injuries and the damage and the extent of the trauma. So knowing that, I asked her if she had seen her face yet. And when she replied no, I knew that we had to show her before plastics arrived in order to give her the information that she needed to make the decision about her care and whether to stay or whether to go home. So we found a mirror and we showed her face, which was a really hard moment. And as she looked at her face, she could see where he had struck her in the nose and was missing an entire part of her nose where her bridge of her nose should have been. And it was just a black space with a little bit of blood. And as she sort of sat there and processed what she was seeing and, the gravity of the night and everything, she made the decision to stay. And she also made the decision to move forward with pressing charges. So with that in mind, that example is meant to just help us recognize and also ask that we hear what patients need to know in order to make their decisions, especially in these cases. Which is why, again, it's important to know our audience. We have power, we have authority. And when we're working with patients of intimate partner violence, that's a relationship based on power and control. Imagine being a patient and having an interaction with a provider that conveys that they have all the power and all the control in this patient and provider relationship. Knowing the nuances of intimate partner violence can open up a conversation with patients in really powerful ways, because you're speaking with them in a way that they can tell you not only probably believe them, which is huge, but you understand that, and you don't try to have them find the words necessarily to explain themselves. So often these patients have experiences with friends and with family who, when they're trying to tell them their stories, are then reinforced with the abuser's message that they're crazy, that nobody will believe them, or that they deserve it. Having a medical professional speak to you in a way that validates your experience is incredibly powerful. Healthcare professionals, we don't live in a vacuum. I'd like us all to kind of take a moment and think of how we're socialized around gender and sex, intimate relationships and violence. We should be challenging the messages and the images that are sent and received through movies, through media, through political systems, and our social norms. A couple of myths to be aware of is, that domestic violence is a private family matter, and it's not. It's everybody's business. We should all care, and we should all do what we can, to intervene, to stop, to educate, whatever we find ourselves in that conversation might be. Domestic violence is always serious. Yes, there are different spots on the spectrum, but it is something that we should always take very seriously. So keep these myths and the actual facts in mind. Trauma-informed care. So I think that this is kind of a hot topic, and, maybe you've heard of it before, maybe you haven't, but it should be a universal practice that we try to apply to all of our patient interactions, especially to those in intimate partner violence relationships. Asking and informing patients of the reasons why before we touch them, or asking their health history, what brings them in today, et cetera. It creates validation and inclusion, two things that they're definitely not getting in their intimate relationships. By doing so, you can build rapport and trust, but you also are offering a counter narrative to the abuser's message, which is devaluing and dismissive of the patient. So moving on to number 2, as we look at challenges of autonomy and confidentiality, as we work with patients of intimate partner violence, again, remembering back to talking about the feeling of paternalistic communication or wanting to try to influence the decisions that these patients might make, and just how important it is to recognize that impulse and also honor their ability to make their own decisions. So this is a case review. This is from a patient of mine when I worked in Chicago. She was a 58-year-old Korean female who was receiving inpatient and outpatient care there in Chicago for a malignant brain tumor. In her immediate household was her husband and her adult daughter. I, at the time, was an inpatient social worker on the neuro unit for brain tumors and general neurology. And so she was someone that I saw every day for probably 1 to 2 weeks. And she came into the unit after having surgery, and her prognosis was not great. She was doing really well after surgery. She had capacity, she was making decisions. And as the doctors and the surgeons were talking to her about next steps, as far as her care and things that she could expect from her level of function, the patient let us know that she was in an abusive relationship with her husband. And moving forward, she didn't want to go home to him and be in relationship with him anymore because she wanted to be free if she was going to live out the rest of her days. And so in an effort to help her, we made her a confidential patient. When he came to visit the next time, we had to inform him that he was no longer allowed to visit her, which was a pretty intense moment. We had to ask our security team to come up and escort him out. The patient had a really strong reaction to having that experience. At first she was incredibly excited and so proud of herself for finally trying to take back her own agency. And then the following day, she felt really badly about it, and that she maybe had brought shame to her family and created stress. So she was sort of oscillating between feeling really powerful and feeling like she had made a wrong decision. And to complicate things a little bit further, she started to have seizures, which she would recover from. And so, she would only have some temporary moments where she wasn't able to make decisions or talk to us about what care needs she wanted. So in Chicago, the state of Illinois actually has a list of who medical professionals can contact and who is next in line for decision making in the event that a patient can't make a decision on their own. So in that moment, it was the adult daughter who stepped in, which, the patient had said from the very, very beginning, she was okay with. She consented to sharing everything with her daughter. So we had no problem doing so. Probably about 5 or 6 days in, maybe 2 or 3 days before she was discharged, the patient decided that she had made the wrong decision and that she had learned more about her diagnosis, her prognosis, and was talking to her family about what the next steps would be. And after doing so, she informed us that she did want her husband to come visit her. She did plan on discharging home with him, and she wanted us to share everything that we possibly could with him about her medical condition. And that was really hard. It was really hard for our staff. It was really hard for the patient's daughter. And that's something that I'll address here in a minute. One of the things that we went back and forth about as a team, as we're meeting in the morning, going over our patient lists, she was having seizures, but she was decision making most of the time, so who gets to decide? Are we sharing information with the patient, with the daughter, with her husband? It was an everyday conversation, and the patient's condition, while it was mostly stable, there were moments where we weren't sure if it was going to continue to be. And so taking into consideration, not only does she have a medical condition, that kind of puts that into question, but she's also in an intimate partner violence relationship where she is being influenced and pressured, by her partner about whether or not he should be allowed to make decisions for her or should be involved in her care. And when she decided to involve him one day and not the next, it's up to us to honor that because she has the ability to make those decisions. She herself can consent to care, and she can involve whomever she wants. When someone that you're working with doesn't necessarily have capacity or the ability to make decisions for themselves, or they're temporarily impaired or permanently, and they're in an intimate partner violence relationship, especially here in Colorado, where we don't have a list of people that we can move through in those moments of emergency or important decision making. We need to be thinking about that ahead of time, especially for these patients, if we can, talking to them about their advance directives, about medical power of attorney or proxy, or even trying to get them to verbally state who would they appoint if they were not in relationship with their current partner, or what would they want in terms of their care, and trying to figure out how we can support them with paperwork, with documentation, so that way if they find themselves and we find ourselves in that position, we have something, that we can refer to guide us as we move through with their care. So special considerations that come up when we're giving care to these patients as far as confidentiality, which I know is something that we all practice every day. It's one of the biggest things that we protect for our patients is their confidentiality. When you have a patient in an intimate partner violence relationship, that can look a little bit different. In the emergency room, we have confidential patients. Patients often come in as a doe. Or, I know that on the floor, at least when I was inpatient, we used to have pseudonyms for patients that would have passwords. And so they would be able to give that information to whomever they would approve of contacting them. And they would be able to ask for that patient or give us the password. And then we knew that they were able to get information from us. So that can look a little bit different. And I think while most healthcare facilities have a similar pathway, I think that if you don't know yours, it's important to talk to management or to develop one or find where that information is located, whether that's on a shared server or somewhere on the floor. So that way, if you can or cannot share information with their partner. Oftentimes, because there's no privacy and there's so much control in these relationships, logins, passwords, those things can all be shared with an abuser. Oftentimes they can put malware on someone's phone in order to access their applications, get into their email accounts, you name it. And I know that we have our health apps, and you can assign a proxy through there, and the proxy through there can basically see the entire medical chart. So imagine an abusive partner putting themselves as a proxy and being able to access all of the records for our patients. Another thing to think about is if an abusive partner is known and they're in the room while the patient is receiving care, and even if they're not known or suspected, it can be uncomfortable, but absolutely, by all means, figure out how to say, all of our patients here at UC Health are granted confidentiality in care. And so all that we ask is that we have a few minutes alone while we do this examination or while we take their history in order to honor that. We can get you a chair and you can either sit out in the hallway or you can go take a walk and we'll let you know when you can come back in. And by using that language with the abusive partner, it takes the onus off of the patient. It makes them a little less suspect of thinking that, the patient might say something about them or share information about their relationship that he or she doesn't want them to share. And it also lessens the likelihood that maybe we would be agitating that relationship that could then result in any sort of like argument or violence once they discharge home. Another challenge can be if a partner shows up and, let's say they have an injury like a broken hand or a foot, and maybe they came to the emergency room without their partner's awareness in order to get care. That can show up if they have shared insurance. It can show up if they monitor bills, so trying to talk with them about, can those bills be sent anywhere else? Do they want it electronically? How they can contact the insurance company to see if there's anything they can do in order to have a little bit more control over that information. And the same thing goes for discharge paperwork and resource information. So discharge paperwork, is a basic summary of everything that we've done in the emergency room. Resource information can be very revealing. If I'm giving someone information on domestic violence shelters or trauma counseling and their perpetrator or abusive partner sees that, it could have some really bad outcomes for them. It could cause a fight. It could make the abuser think that this person is preparing to leave, which is the most dangerous time for a person, is when they're leaving a relationship. So with that in mind, I always ask, can I email this to you? Can I send this to your mom's house or your sister's house? Would it be better if we didn't give it to you and you took a picture of it? Can I put it in a confidential envelope? Things like that. So being creative with your problem solving can really make a big difference. Why do they stay? So this was a big question that came up with the patient who was inpatient in the neuro unit. All of the nurses and the techs and the therapists who saw her really struggled with the ultimate decision for her to go home with her partner and to have him re-engage in her care. Everyone was on her team and wanted to see her do well. And while some of them understood the dynamic and often, why patients go back, because it takes on average 7 to 11 times to leave an abusive partner, we had to have a lot of conversations around it. We had to debrief about it. We had to talk about honoring autonomy and self-determination, and that she had the mental capacity to consent to care and to make these decisions. Some of our staff said some things about, her deserving it when she gets home, and that it would be harder to give her the same level of care the next time if she were to return. And those are things that are said out of concern for feeling that way. It's not that they were really questioning whether or not they could give quality care. It was just something that they were struggling with internally. It's really, really bothering them. They're very compassionate and competent providers. So this experience really brought some things to light that were ethical dilemmas and challenges. So language frames our world, and being able to express ourselves and understand the conflict of feelings that we might have and the emotions that come up and why they do can really be a guiding light. So as we leave today and as you move forward after this talk and hopefully think about, intimate partner violence care a little bit differently, talk to your peers, talk to people that you trust, read about it, try to find support for yourself. So that way, if and when you're in that moment, you can dig deep, and it'll be a little bit easier to navigate. I'm going to play a really quick clip because I think it's important to watch and hear actual survivors, and why they stay.
Yeah, I feel like I'm nervous, and I shouldn't be. I've done this kind of thing before.
Did you ever think this would happen to you?
No, I couldn't conceive of somebody hitting someone else.
What were the warning signs something was wrong? What did you do to provoke it?
I think just being a woman provokes it.
Why didn't you just leave?
It puts the blame on her. It's like, why didn't you leave? They don't say, why did he do this?
You grow up as a kid and you think that it's going to be like a fairy tale. You'll meet somebody and fall in love and, everything will be wonderful.
What are the scars? Well, I've got physical scars. In the early days, I just hated them.
A scar up there that goes all the way up into my scalp. Another one on that side.
Well, I suffered some severe traumatic brain injury.
I had 35% burns. So obviously it's my left side, my neck, my left chest, my hand, my back, and the back of my legs.
I was bedridden for years.
I walk around with all these horrible scars, and a lot of people see this as if like, ooh, it's not something pleasant to look at, but I see them as a blessing.
They're sort of a badge of honour now, and they're a reminder of where I was and what I don't want, and it just reminds me how lucky I am.
That if this hadn't happened, I wouldn't be in that hospital. If I wasn't in that hospital, I would not have met the social worker and the police. And I sure would not be sitting here today talking about it all.
Yeah, it's funny, scars, isn't it, from hurts. Like, your wound heals up, but it leaves a scar and there's a weakness there.
The images and the sounds just are always in the back of your mind. They never leave you.
I'm not as... Wow. I can't be affectionate to people. I don't like touching people anymore, getting close to people.
What was left was a shell of a person, and it took a really, really long time for me to put that back together.
So as we move into our third objective, which is the legal issues that impact intimate partner violence and the care that we give, I'm going to go over just a couple of things. So mandatory versus non-mandatory arrest dates. So every state is different. So wherever you're practicing medicine is going to be different. So if you stay in the same place or if you move states, make sure that you update yourself on what that is. Colorado is a mandatory arrest state. So that means police are obligated to make an arrest if there is probable cause to do so. Interestingly enough, mandatory reporting laws vary from state to state as well. And Colorado is actually not a mandatory reporting law or reporting state, except for in the case of serious bodily injury. And that changed within the last couple of years. So this sort of just goes over in details what that means as far as like mandatory reporting and serious bodily injury and the requirements for that. So usually anything that's like a gunshot or a stab wound requires that we would have to call police and let them know because of the kind of injuries and assault that it is. And just to note that, you know, injuries that are suspected from domestic violence don't have to be reported if they're not serious as a result of that change. I think it's important that we ask ourselves, you know, like how are these laws not only impacting the care that we provide, but are there benefits, are there risks, you know, for the people that they're intended to affect? You know, so in changing the mandatory reporting laws, you know, the hope is that that would give victims more autonomy in their situation and time to figure out how to leave the safety of their relationship. You know, mandatory arrests can result in more perpetrators being arrested. You know, in medical professionals, it's just because it's not mandatory reporting doesn't necessarily mean, you know, that they're not going to participate when there's serious bodily injury, you know, or educate their patients on the risks of intimate partner violence. The risks in the changing of the law is that, you know, it can increase the possibility that injured patients avoid seeking medical care out of fear for police involvement, you know, more so, especially in states where it's mandatory reporting, even if it's not serious bodily injury. Another unfortunate thing is, you know, I've had a lot of people who are actually the victims in their relationships, and either the situation has been construed differently, or perhaps they were fighting back in, you know, self-defense, and it resulted in an arrest for them. You know, mandatory arresting and reporting means that police intervention can also agitate a perpetrator and abuser, and that can increase aggression in the relationship and can actually put, you know, the other person at more risk for harm or for danger, whatever that might be. And then for professionals, you know, reporting against the wish of an adult patient, you know, it violates confidentiality, it violates autonomy, you know, and it also doesn't include them in the consent piece of that. You know, so we need to be asking ourselves, you know, does reporting harm the patient? And really honoring whether or not they decide to report to police. That can be a really hard thing to honor. You know, we see folks and we take care of them. And I assume, you know, we all want the best for anyone that walks through the doors of our healthcare facilities. And understanding that mandatory reporting or encouraging someone to report might not be the best thing for them. Because as much as we can educate ourselves, or as much as we can know about intimate partner violence and the nuances of it, we are not in that relationship. We're not in each relationship. And so only that person, only that patient knows the extreme and the nuance of their partner. And it is up to them to decide and use the information that they have on when they can leave, if they can leave. And we have to be able to support them in that. You know, also when serious bodily injury is present, bringing them into that conversation, walking them through what that looks like. You know, why do police have to be notified? You know, communication again is so important with all patients, and especially these patients. So there's a difference between law enforcement reporting and medical reporting. So forensic nursing for us does most of the medical reporting. You know, they will do an extensive exam if a patient consents to an F&E exam. You know, there are pictures and bodily fluids logged and processed and put in the patient's chart. You know, specific charting and notes are taken about all of the injuries, the context under which they happened. So even if a patient decides not to contact police, they can consent to and participate in a forensic exam and have that information there if they change their mind. Also, at least I know at UC emergency room, they have about 7 days to make a decision if they want to come back, just because, you know, some of the evidence can change as far as the physical evidence that can be collected. You know, so if the person has had a day and just can't either tolerate being touched or just needs to go home and have some solitude, they have the option to come back, which I think is pretty incredible. I want to take a minute. I just want to give a quick shout out to the University of Colorado's forensic team. I think they are, you know, incredible for everything that they do. They have all of my gratitude. They have all of my respect. They are, you know, the embodiment of trauma-informed care, and they are competent and they do quality work every single day. One of the last things I want to talk about how law and the legal system can impact our care is, you know, when we're talking to our patients about next steps after they leave our services, you know, what can they do? And oftentimes the unfortunate thing is that if a patient chooses not to make a report with police, they are locked out of victim services, at least through the criminal justice system. So most police departments have victim advocates. They have specific victim advocate funds and grants and personnel, and those persons are amazing. And they work with us and they will help with hotel vouchers or transportation vouchers. They can help folks prepare for court and things like that. They can help them with paperwork for orders of protection. But unfortunately, there is a police case number that has to be tied to that. And they have to reference that in order to be able to have that kind of support. One of the biggest challenges, especially in Aurora, Denver area, and really Colorado, is just shelter and safe housing resources. You know, we don't have access to reserved shelter beds or housing vouchers through the hospital. And so if a local shelter is full and the person has decided that they don't want to make a report, but also it is not safe for them to go home and they have no one else to call, it can put us in a really precarious situation, trying to figure out where they can go and how they're going to get there. You know, so one of the last questions I want to pose before, you know, we take questions, you know, is do we have an obligation to provide shelter and emergency housing options? Do we have an obligation to procure funds or work with our community partners in order to secure beds and things like that? So that way these patients have safe places to go once they leave our care. So takeaways, you know, patients experiencing intimate partner violence, they're in our emergency rooms, our inpatient units, our outpatient units, our private practices. They're in your care already. You know, we are obligated to educate ourselves in an effort to provide the best kind of care for these patients. And just, you know, today is a crash course in what intimate partner violence is. It is so nuanced and complex, and I really encourage everyone to try to understand it better moving forward. And hopefully, you know, that with informed and ethical care and advocacy, you know, we can make a difference because we have to. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you very, very much, Jessica. Really appreciate that, and very compelling case or cases. To start with, I have a question regarding decision-making. In the case that you presented of the woman, the daughter was the decision maker, but I was also wondering if you have had experience with the decision maker being the perpetrator, and if so, how you might handle that.
Yeah, so originally in that case, the husband was the decision maker. And so like up until the day she had decided she didn't want him involved anymore, he had been helping make those decisions in the moments when she was unable to. So like I said, luckily in Illinois, there's kind of a predetermined list, you know, and adult children are pretty much after spouse. And the patient had already given verbal consent that her daughter could do it. So yes, I mean, the concern that an abuser of a partner is making decisions for a patient happens. It happens all the time. I, have grappled with that. Sometimes they have paperwork and, you're looking at the paperwork, which is a legal document, thinking, okay, do we have to honor this? But then also, are there signs of abuse? Is there anything we can do as far as getting APS involved? Because is this person now a vulnerable person? Each case is so different and nuanced. Sometimes there has to be an ethics consult with the ethics team in order to talk to the medical providers and say this person doesn't have capacity. There is legitimate concern and potential evidence for abuse. There's also legal documentation saying that the abuser is the decision maker. And then looking at how do we go about finding a proxy, and do we have the right to do that?
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A question, what does the evidence tell us about how best to screen patients for abuse and exploitation when they present for care that is not related to injuries from abuse? There is a Joint Commission standard requiring us to screen upon entry into the hospital and an ongoing basis. I believe into the hospital has been determined to include all areas, including non-ED and non-inpatient areas.
Yeah, so there's usually, it usually will go through the nursing staff doing the intake assessment. So it's like a universal statement, or it's through one of their flow sheets. It'll say, do you feel safe at home? Or something like intimate partner violence is something that many people experience. Here at the hospital, we make sure to ask all of our patients if they're safe at home. And that's the reason why I'm asking you these questions right now. And you can say, you don't have to answer that if you'd like to not answer that. But in order for us to give you the best care, we'd like to know. So usually it involves a universal question. Usually it's nursing doing the intake questioning, which is how the screening happens.
Okay, thank you. Also, someone posted the information on a book, a useful and informative book recommended, No Visible Bruises. Is that one you're familiar with? And are there any other resources you would recommend if people wanted to read or get more information on this?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular book,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that if that person has read it and is recommending it, by all means, more knowledge is power. I would, off the top of my head, I have like a running list of books that I reference and have read. If you're looking for something to give patients, I think it's Dartmouth has a PDF file that I frequently will print off that has a bunch of books. It has a bunch of websites, support groups, and interactive resources for persons who are survivors or are currently in intimate partner violence relationships. I'm more than happy to send out a list that we can send to folks after this.
Okay, thank you. A number of comments. First of all, just very excellent. People really getting a great deal out of this. So thank you, Jessica, for this. And also a number of resources, Violence Free Colorado and Futures Without Violence, all of those, again, being other resources, as well as some comments from physicians about the ways that they ask about this. One, I worked in labor and delivery, and I would always do my intake interviews privately. I would ask the partner to go get something for my patient or send them on a walk, allowing me time to ask questions about IPV while alone. So you were speaking to that earlier and the importance of being able to get people separate to be able to get more information and so forth. I have a question related to that somewhat, which is, if then what happens is a mandatory reporting that comes out of that and the breach of confidentiality, how do you think about that ethically? I know dynamically that's a very awkward and difficult situation, but are there ethical obligations to the patient separate from the legal requirements that you could speak to?
I mean, I think that would probably fall under, like informed consent to move forward with answering the question. And by telling them and prefacing, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I am a mandated reporter. What that means for me is that in the event of X, Y, or Z, if you share that information with me, I have to contact police. And that lets the patient know, even if that's their experience, whether or not they decide to tell that to you.
Okay. So another question, how are you documenting your notes so that the perpetrator does not read the conversation about IPV if they have access to the record?
Yeah, great question. So like all of the forensic nursing questions and things like that are under a confidential, like break the glass note and template. So as far as that goes, the patient, I actually don't know about how that shows up in their online chart. But people who are looking at the chart and not giving care, can't access that. They can't read that to the perpetrator. You can let the patient or the perpetrator know that, like, this is a confidential note. I'm not able to share that with you. I think it's a great way to sort of give a red flag just in general, that this is an extra sensitive note and we should not be sharing that information with anyone other than the patient unless we specifically know. And also, if the patient has consented and, said that it's okay for their abusive partner to access their records, that is their decision.
Another question, how often does domestic violence occur against men and within the LGBTQ communities? Is the approach the same?
So I know that there's a bunch of information and new studies being done, especially with LGBTQ and on males as well. Historically, it affects females in larger numbers, but obviously, both sexes are impacted and anyone along the spectrum as well. I don't have specific numbers, but I know that, special consideration for the kind of power and control that can be wielded in those relationships, like threatening to out your partner to their family as a way to control them or to scare them, or using maybe like personal photos and posting them online, things that they hadn't wanted to share. Like those kinds of tactics are used. Males report less a lot of times because of the social stereotype that men are supposed to be stronger. There's an embarrassment around experiencing physical violence from a female partner, so there's an effort in order to be able to have conversations and make it comfortable for male patients to share that information. It's the same way, asking if they're safe in their relationships, screening all patients, not just female patients, or anyone that identifies as female. Trauma-informed care should be across the board.
Right. Thank you very much. I want to go back to there are a number of comments about the record and so Loretta, are you still on? You wanted to make a comment about records going out to people.
Yes, and thank you. I wrote a comment. The forensic nursing notes have a special button if we want to publish it to the patient record. Otherwise, all of our notes will not be visible to them in My Health Connection.
Perfect. Thanks, Loretta.
Okay, thank you. And Julie Merlino, are you still on? She said she did learn that any encounters listed as a confidential visit will indeed show up in My Health Connection. So there may be some questions about that. So in terms of that important issue. Another question, what could the care be specific for pregnant patients or LGBT patients? Has the CU provider provided education materials on healthy relationships?
I'm not sure what the ask is. Is there specific information?
Particularly for pregnant patients. Yeah.
About being pregnant in an intimate partner violence relationship, or
it sounds like it. Mm-hmm.
I've never worked in like OB, so I'm not sure like what their staff provide to pregnant patients. I know that when a pregnant person comes through the emergency department, we talk to them about domestic violence if that's indicated, or if we're screening them for that, almost like any other patient. As far as like special care, patients have been thrown downstairs or beaten pretty badly to try to make them lose a pregnancy and things like that. So those kinds of things are handled a little bit differently. I'm not really sure how to answer the question, because I'm not really sure what the ask is.
Okay. All right. There is, Loretta posted that there is a UC Health pamphlet on healthy relationships that's available through the Print Center. There are a number of, from the social work perspective, according to Jamie Sweegarden, for social work perspective, if a pregnant woman is subject to known DV or IPV, it's a mandated report. Same if child observes domestic violence. So this really has many, many dimensions to it. And there are a lot of different reporting relationships. I think some of the important, there are many more things to be said about this. I'm aware of time, but the issues around decision-making and autonomy and ethics and safe discharge and so forth are all very compelling. And Jessica, you've brought this before us in a really important way. If you can get some of these resources, we'll get to Sue Clifford, who can send those out to people if they would like those. She's offered to send all of that material out. But really want to thank you, Jessica, for your work in this area, for your sensitivity, and for your help for all of us today about the issue and about the ethical dimensions of that. Thank you very, very much. Everyone, we have our next Ethics Grand Rounds will be in June, and that will be on our annual topic has to do with research, ethics and research. And so that will be Marilyn Coors and I believe one other person who will be presenting in June. So watch for that information, that flyer. I did want to call everybody's attention to the fact that next Friday, the 16th, is National Healthcare Directives Day. So when you showed that slide, I was reminded to announce that to everyone to watch for activities around that next week. So hopefully we'll see all of you next month. That will be another very good Ethics Grand Rounds. Really appreciate your questions, your comments, and your participation. And again, Jessica, thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Very good.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.